Thank you for the kind introduction, Casey, and thanks to the Global Ethical Finance Initiative team for inviting me to speak at the 2022 summit. I'm delighted to be with you today and to take part in this important conversation about ESG in a volatile world. While we represent different organizations and come from different places, bringing varied perspectives with us, gatherings like this do remind us that we are focused on shared goals that are at the heart of sustainable development goals, tackling the climate crisis, meeting urgent development needs of the vulnerable living in poverty, and aiming for peace and prosperity. Achieving these goals has become even more challenging given the overlapping global crises, the economic slowdown, rising inflation, deepening food insecurity, fragility and conflict, and rising geopolitical tensions. At the World Bank Group, we have been responding to these crises at unprecedented scale, deploying a record $272 billion since the start of the pandemic. As you may know, the World Bank was founded in 1944 to help countries rebuild after the Second World War. It is an international cooperative supported by 189 shareholding governments who have put in around 19 billion US dollars of equity over these years. And this gets leveraged to raise funds by issuing bonds to private investors in the capital markets. Today, our goals are to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity, ensuring economic opportunities in society for everyone. Using this model, more than $800 billion have been lent to developing countries at rates lower than those that they can obtain from the international market, together with our offering of course, development expertise and knowledge sharing. The World Bank finances its activities by issuing AAA rated bonds in the capital markets. IBRD, or the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, raises about $50 billion a year for middle income countries. And the International Development Association, or IDA, which is actually a more recent entrant in the capital markets, it raises about 10 billion US dollars per year to supplement funds received from donors, providing support to the poorest and most vulnerable lower income countries by way of grants or highly concessional loans. No country is immune from impacts of climate change. Climate change is profoundly connected to our institutions' goals of development and human well-being. It impacts almost all development indicators, including lost lives and livelihoods and food and water insecurity. According to our most recent research, climate change could drive 216 million people to migrate within their own countries by 2050, with hotspots of internal migration emerging as early as 2030 and spreading and intensifying thereafter. Having contributed the least to global greenhouse gas emissions, the poorest people and countries are especially vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. Regardless of where they live, it is the poor and the vulnerable who are suffering the most from climate change impacts. At the World Bank, we know that we can only achieve good development outcomes, reduce poverty, and boost sustainable growth by acting on climate and making sustainable choices. We are working with countries to adopt a whole of economy approach that focuses on policies and plans to create the right enabling environment for climate action and sustainable development pathways. While World Bank is the single largest provider of climate finance to developing countries, we provided $26 billion last year alone. We are looking beyond simply financing green projects. We are thinking holistically about the greening of entire economies. In everything we do, we focus on helping countries integrate climate considerations into their development strategies. We are helping them deploy climate finance in ways that achieve the greatest impact for mitigation and adaptation. In short, we are weaving climate into all our decision making, not just for investments in sectors, traditionally associated with climate, such as energy and transport, but also in health, education, and fiscal policy. Our investment decisions are made based on where they have the greatest positive impact. Let me share with you a recent interesting example. We supported an unconventional reforestation campaign in Sierra Leone, #FreeTownTheTreeTown, which is harnessing digital technology to track trees planted and employment opportunities created, especially for local youth during the COVID-19 pandemic. The campaign is helping to establish long-term climate resilience for the community and comes with ecosystem benefits that include reducing heat stress, improving air and water quality, and reducing flooding and landslide risks. And in Vietnam, working with the government, the World Bank just released the Country Climate and Development Report to help the country balance its overall development and growth goals with climate risks. We found that without the right investments in adaptation and mitigation, climate change could cost Vietnam 12 to 14.5% of their GDP per year by 2050 and plunge up to a million people into extreme poverty. But now there is an opportunity to implement this whole of economy approach and put in place the right policies and strategies to decarbonize and achieve their net zero ambition without reducing GDP growth. We do believe that this holistic approach can be applied not just to corporates, institutions, or economies. It can and should also be brought to the capital markets to make sure that all capital flows align with sustainable objectives. As I mentioned earlier, at the World Bank, we have mobilized significant resources for development by leveraging capital markets and engaging with donors. In the financial markets too, we are seeing promising signs of an integrated approach to climate and sustainability. Let me highlight a few areas where the World Bank is helping to build sustainable capital markets to channel finance towards sustainable activities. The World Bank brought innovation to the climate finance space, and many of you would know this. We issued the first green bond back in 2008, and we have now gone further to label all our bonds as sustainable development bonds. The green bond that we issued in 2008 catalyzed investing for purpose in the climate capital markets. It helped set the standard for the market, and today we continue to play a key role in developing the necessary market infrastructure through our work on the green bond principles and the harmonized framework for impact reporting. The sustainability label in our sustainable development bonds, which is broader and more inclusive than simply green, not only reflects our global work in social and economic development and climate, but also the fact that all our bonds meet the strictest standards of sustainability, supporting positive impact around the globe. Our climate adaptation and resilience. On climate adaptation and resilience, we are using our expertise and AAA status to issue catastrophe bonds, which are structured bonds that provide countries a tool to transfer climate and disaster risk from less frequent but severe events to the capital markets. As heat waves, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and droughts are intensifying with climate change, they are not only impacting lives and essential infrastructure, but are also requiring governments to be prepared to deliver funding quickly in times of these catastrophe. In the past 2 decades, the World Bank has transferred almost $5.1 billion worth of catastrophe risk across more than 20 countries. Last July, we helped Jamaica become the first Caribbean government and small island state to independently sponsor a catastrophe bond. This was a $185 million CAT bond, and this is providing Jamaica financial protection against losses from named storms for 3 Atlantic tropical cyclone seasons. And let me share with you another interesting structure, which was the Wildlife Conservation Bond, which we issued in March 2022. The 5-year $150 million bond is contributing to protecting and increasing black rhino population in 2 protected areas in South Africa, while providing environmental and social benefits to the local communities. This innovative bond leveraged capital markets to raise funds from private investors without adding to South Africa's sovereign debt. We are also working very closely with our member countries to help them incorporate standards and transparency guidelines to facilitate development of their own sustainable capital markets. Our efforts range from technical assistance on design and implementation of countries' climate plans under the Paris Agreement to a range of policy advice and advisory work. Our advisory and technical assistance program has facilitated the development of green taxonomies in places like Colombia, the issuance of sovereign and sub-sovereign green bonds in Egypt, Nigeria, Fiji, Philippines, and in other countries, and sustainability bonds in Thailand and Malaysia. I spoke mostly about the World Bank to explain what we are doing, but of course, we cannot solve these massive challenges without the private sector. Over the next 30 years, a concerted push by governments and both public and private partners will be needed to mobilize the necessary policy enablers and financial resources needed to tackle climate change. That's why today's event is so critical. Financial decisions need to be made based on where they matter most for the people, for the planet, and for a shared purpose. Before I conclude, I would just like to emphasize why this holistic viewpoint is so critical for the emerging market and developing countries and what is potentially at stake. Accounting and disclosure guidelines, national green and social taxonomies, and sustainable finance regulations are taking shape around the world. And it will be critical that they do not have the unintended consequence of steering private capital away from precisely those countries where it can have the greatest positive impact. In all these approaches, transparency is key. And while standardization and harmonization are welcome, country context needs to be included as a factor to help investors assess ESG risks and opportunities. Lack of data, capacity, and resources in emerging market and developing economies make them different from developed country contexts, even when the positive impact of investments there are much greater. In summary, I would like to emphasize that we must be cautious with these fast moving ESG developments in financial markets to ensure that incentives drive capital towards where it is most needed and has the greatest impact. At the World Bank, we are focused on transparency and an integrated approach with a holistic viewpoint, looking at risks together with positive impact, and we hope many of you will do the same. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I wish you a very successful summit.